Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Talking Point here on the Rangers Review. I'm Chris Jack and I'm delighted to be joined as always by Stevie Clifford for this latest episode. Stevie, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. It doesn't seem like 2 weeks since we last recorded the last one. So into the breach we go again, Christopher. It was an emotive subject in the last one, and this is just as much. So at least we can't be accused of shying away from the big talking points, that's for sure. But it'd be nice if we just got to talk about, nice goals and good performances. So hopefully that'll be soon.
I'm sure that will come one day, but as you alluded to there, it's been another interesting, shall we say, few days on and off the park at Ibrox. There is always things to talk about, and we are here to have a closer look at some of the key issues that surround Rangers in a football sense, financial sense, in the dressing room, in the boardroom. We're here to cover all the bases. This week we will leave the dressing room and we'll get back into the boardroom and the situation there following the departure of John Bennett on Saturday. He stepped down as chairman. Rangers released a statement citing health issues and, of course, naturally wished John well. Something that we have echoed on the various platforms over the last couple of days. We certainly wish John well in his ongoing recovery and certainly hope to see him back at Ibrox sooner rather than later. Stevie, does John's departure come as a surprise? Now, he's come in for a lot of criticism over recent months. The Ibrox issue clearly being the main talking point. But you then tie in that with the appointment of Michael Beale, the backing of Michael Beale, the appointment and backing of James Bisgrove. Does it almost feel like this is the right time for John to kind of step away? And Rangers fans, I think, should thank him for his efforts and certainly wish him well. But does this feel like perhaps an opportune moment for change and for John to kind of step down from that boardroom role?
I think the problem that John Bennett has, but actually, Chris, see, before I even start on that, what I would like to do is thank John Bennett for his time at the club and wish him well in his recovery again for ill health. And I hope that him and his family get some time. I know it's been a really difficult time for them, where John receiving so much scrutiny over his role at the club. So first things first, I think it's right to say that, and you can say that, but at the same time, does it feel like the right time for him to leave the board? Yes, it does. I don't take any particular pleasure in saying that, but I think the problem that John Bennett had as chairman when he was coming in is that a lot of the fans distrusted him through his best in class comment anyway, and there was a lot of negativity surrounding that. So already you had that up against him, and I think that he has overseen some moments, particularly the stadium, the appointments that he's made that haven't worked, that have been really difficult. The mismanagement of last summer, basically, as he said himself, giving the keys to people that weren't equipped to have them, and the mess that left, and we've had to subsequently clean up. So there's been a lot of difficult moments for John Bennett, unfortunately, and he's become the lightning rod for everything. Now, I will say, I can say this honestly, that the stadium thing was not his fault. He has put people in charge that he believed were capable. However, it still happened on his watch, Chris, and it shouldn't have happened. And being a absent chairman as such, which isn't a criticism, but he wasn't a day-to-day chairman. He lived down south and he left it for other people, and all of a sudden we had a monumental mess. So that is all happened under his watch, and it's difficult because once the fans have decided, Chris, what's happening, the next thing for John Bennett as chairman was, his face on banners in the stand, because that's the level of support he was there, or was getting from the fans at this moment in time, because they sacked the board chants, etc. So I think it is the right time. And what I would say is that John and Gary, his brother, have done a lot of work at the club to cut down costs and to save money and do a lot of things, so a lot of good things, but we'll never hear about that because, it's overshadowed by a reluctance to talk to anybody and kind of explain their role in a wider kind of sense and what good things they are doing and what they are doing at the club. So from that point of view, Chris, I think once you lose the fans' trust, it's definitely the right time. And I think that's where he was. But this is what I would fire back to you, Chris, is what kind of legacy do you think he leaves? His he had to reshape the club with Robertson, Wilson, Dixon leaving, but he put his face in James Bisgrove and Michael Beale. He talked a lot about getting that £10.5 million deficit down. Obviously, the stadium stuff. Sum up John Bennett if you can, and his time and his kind of legacy. Where does that leave you? Is what I'm saying fair? Is how he's viewed fair? How would you sum him up?
I think his standing probably won't be fully known until the fullness of time. Perhaps when the next set of accounts come out and people see that Rangers are in a better position financially. He mentioned that at £10.5 million that you referenced there, Stevie. He mentioned that in the accounts last year. He referenced it again at the AGM, and I know he's done a lot of work to try and bring that down. The Rangers wage bill this season is several £1 million down. It had to be streamlined. The squad had to be reshaped and remodelled. One, from a football perspective, because the team and the squad was not good enough, but the value just wasn't there. You can have a wage bill of that level if you're winning league titles and you're qualifying for latter stages of Europe and you're dominating domestically. You can't justify it, the outlay on some of the players and the outlay in other areas when the club is not in the position that the fans then rightly expect. I know, as you say, there has been a lot of criticism about the Ibrox situation. Things that he inherited ultimately, I think, became part of his downfall. So he inherited that financial situation. He inherited the Ibrox situation to an extent because, as you say, he entrusted other people to go and oversee it, then finds out in early June, sorry, John, we've got a major problem here. That then becomes his problem. That becomes his issue to go and fund and to go and try and solve. So I do understand why the fans will perhaps not look back on his tenure overly favourably, but I do think you rhymed off some of the names there that have left the club, like Sir Robertson, like Sir Andrew Dixon, like Sir Ross Wilson. That process again had to be worked through because things had to change. Now you could argue some of the appointments, Michael Beale didn't work. We spoke about James Bisgrove previously. I think people have different opinions on whether that appointment worked or not, but I think every decision that John made, it was made with the best intentions of the club. It was made with the club at heart, and huge financial commitment behind that as well. Now, John he's over £20 million of his personal wealth into Rangers. Now, that doesn't make him a better Rangers fan or a bigger Rangers fan than anyone else, but I think it's only right that the fans appreciate what he has done financially. And what he has done over the years is not just John Bennett as Rangers chairman over 12 months or so. He has been a director, been an influential figure around about the club through good times and bad. You have to take your share of the stick during the bad times, but I think it's also right that people do recognise some of the good that has been done and don't just write John Bennett off as a terrible Rangers chairman, because I certainly don't think that is I don't think that's the case. But I think it could be further down the line where we actually see what his kind of full legacy is. Now, as the club also look to move forward post John Bennett.
What about the appointment of John Gilligan? Is he the right man at this moment? He obviously is going to be assisted by George Latham, both of them massive Rangers men, both of them really well thought of in business. John Gilligan, obviously with Tenants, was managing director for so long, so he's a lot of good standing, and amongst the right people, so to speak. But tell us a wee bit more about kind of John Gilligan and the appointment of him.
I think if you're looking for a safe pair of hands, almost, that is, you find yourself almost referencing back to like a football situation where a manager leaves. Michael Beale left this time last year. Rangers needed someone who knew the club, who knew the infrastructure, who knew the standards, who knew what needed done. They turned to Stephen Davis and said, look, can you take it? Can you help us out? Can you almost pull on the heartstrings a wee bit, saying, it's not great, but we know you're a big Rangers man. Can you come in and help us out? Stephen Davis was never going to say no in that situation. John Gilligan was certainly not going to say no in this situation. As you pointed to there, George Latham will assist him. That's something that has been on the cards for the last couple of weeks. George will now play even more of a role. And again, like John Bennett, thankfully, like so many of the key figures in Rangers' recent history, they're doing it from a position of a love of the club. I'm not doing it because they want to make a quick buck out of it. I'm not doing it because they just want to put the tie on and sit in the director's box and get to go on a European trip or get to go to the big games. They're doing it because they want to help the club. They realise the situation that Rangers are in, and they think that they can help. So I think John Gilligan, as you pointed out, hugely experienced, hugely successful in a business perspective, but also knows Rangers. He knows Scottish football. He also came in alongside Dave King and Paul Murray back in 2015. It's hard to believe we're only a couple of months away from the 10th anniversary of that EGM and that boardroom struggle coming to an end. I think what John has found this time, it's not as serious as it was back then. No, Rangers really was a shell of a club in terms of staff and infrastructure, even just around the place. I interviewed John for my book when we won 55, and he mentioned like the sense of dilapidation around Ibrox, like the wood panelling hadn't been taken care of, the carpets were threadbare, there's curtains and blinds hanging off the wall, the place hadn't been cleaned. He's not walking into a Rangers that's in that state, thankfully, but he is walking into a Rangers that does need a pick-me-up. It does need a bit of direction, and I think he's the perfect man to do that. As yet, for an unspecified timeline, we'll come on to talk about the chairman search and the chief exec search, but I think he has a steady pair of hands, if you like, just to help Rangers regroup after the loss of the chairman and get them through these next, as yet to be determined, number of weeks and months.
That's something I was going to ask you. Obviously, he's kind of came out and, or not came from the cold, so to speak, because Rangers have only got Graham Park that's really based in Glasgow, haven't we? Based in Scotland. Julian Wooltart, George Taylor, John Halstead are all abroad. Do you think that's an issue, Chris? And I think, and this is maybe a wider point, if we had more Glasgow-based directors and people actually managing the club, so to speak, would things like the stadium have happened? Would that? So do we need more presence here doing day-to-day stuff? I think that's important.
I think that's important as well. I think that's something that going forward the club have to look at. We know in this digital age, as we speak over an internet link, that email and messaging and communication is as good as it's ever been. So it's not to say that just because you are on the other side of the world that you are completely detached from what's going on at Ibrox. But I do think you do need boots on the ground almost in some regards. You do need people there just to pop a head into an office and to shake hands, to put a smile on people's faces. You want people to feel empowered at your work. You want people to feel that they are not being watched in a bad sense, but they know that they have standards to match, that they have targets to hit. And I think having more people in and around the club is certainly going to be a key point for me going forward. As you say, Graham Park is the only director that is Scotland based at present. I think John and George they'll be regular faces round about Ibrox. They won't say, well, I'm executive chairman, I'm helping out. By the way, if you want a hand, you can drop me an email. No, they will be visible presences round about Ibrox. I think that's definitely a good point, because you need people to drive things. You need people to, set those standards. You need people to keep on top of the staff, to keep on top of to-do lists. And then when you're in this period where you don't have a CEO as well, I think that becomes even more important. No matter what John's title is and what John George's title is, what role Graham Parker is going to play, no matter how other people can help out digitally from their respective bases around the world. Rangers are a body down in effect because they don't have that chief exec in place. Was it Jim Gillespie looked like getting the job, and that's then not happened. Is that a problem for you now when you look at even just in terms of people being in and around the place? Does that make life more difficult because Rangers, as I say, they are in effect a body down, not having that chief exec figure there at present?
Well, what I would say is that I think it's vitally important they get a CEO in, and I think it was vitally important we got a CEO in 3 months ago, in all honesty. Shouldn't have taken this long, and that disappoints me. And I think what's happened is that John Bennett's came in, realised what a mess the stadium stuff was in, and then prioritised that. And as an expense of that, the CEO position, head of academy, all that kind of stuff has been pushed to the side. Likewise, the Rangers bar, everything like that, that remains a shell, Chris. And, what's happening with that, we haven't had a proper update. And I think that's all just been pushed to the side because we've concentrated on fixing the stadium. Now, I understand that because it's a priority. And I get that absolutely. But I wonder if we still, at the same time, could have been making strides to fix, the CEO thing. It's an urgent position for me. Somewhat, actually, Chris. The CEO is actually more important these days than the chairman. You need a CEO that's based at Ibrox every day. Now, you spoke about John Gilligan, walking around Ibrox. He's already done that, hasn't he? He's already met all the staff. He's already walked into every single office. He's already given people that time. And this may sound like a silly thing, and people watching it who work in offices or work wherever they work on building sites or out and about, when the boss isn't there, you relax, don't you? The gaffer's not here today. Let's, get a bit of a jolly. If your gaffer's permanently not there, what's going to happen to your workplace? People are going to give less and less and less and less. People are going to go away early. Your 4 o'clock finish today will turn into 3:30 tomorrow. And then I'm not suggesting that's happening at Ibrox, but what I'm saying is it's important for a business like our own, the size of it is, to have people on the ground like you mentioned. I think a CEO is imperative, that a CEO is working there on a daily basis. And yes, at this moment in time, it's more important than a chairman because a chairman is a figurehead role. But it's also important once you appoint the right CEO that you appoint the right chairman. And I think something that Graham Souness, and I harp on about this all the time, but I think it's very important because Graham Souness mentioned the lack of footballing knowledge in our club. And I think that's really important that the CEO we get that appointment right, but we also get the chairman appointment right. And through John Bennett's decision, and again, we wish John all the best, etc. It's given Rangers an opportunity, Chris. Opportunity to appoint 2 people that ensure stability and leadership to the club for the next few years. And I think that's really important, going forward. And it raises that other question that we're on to the elephant in the room, so to speak, Chris. I think, Dave King, he spoke passionately this week, about returning to the board. I suppose your best place, you obviously have a good relationship with him. So how likely is it that he could come back? And do you think it's what Rangers really need at this moment? I've got my own kind of strong opinions on it, but on Dave King, give us the latest on that one.
Well, I'll start by, as you say, I spoke to Dave over the weekend. John announced his resignation on Saturday, and I was able to catch up with Dave on Sunday on a range of matters. And when asked about would he return to the club and would he invest in the club, he said, "I think I might be the best person to do it for 2 years. I don't want to do it for 4 or 5 years, but I know the club well enough, and I do think it's a 2-year job. I wouldn't be looking to invest more money in the club. I don't think that's the way forward for the club. I think, and I can't talk for the other guys, there's investor fatigue within the existing board members. So I think the way forward is, in fact, for us to attract additional investment." The investment side of it, I think, is almost as a separate conversation, potentially even a separate show at present. But in terms of Dave saying he would like to come back for 2 years, having spoken to him and having seen the way that how passionate he was about it, I can understand his desire to come in. He clearly feels he's the right man to almost give Rangers that short, sharp boost. Again, to reference it slightly back to football, I think you would get that new manager bounce, you would get that new chairman bounce with Dave King coming in, a man who knows where every skeleton is buried, a man who knows what's behind every door, who knows where every pound coin is being spent. It's whether the rest of the investors, where the rest of the board, do they want a figure like Dave King? Do they want someone who is perhaps not argumentative in a bad way, but a man who does things his way, a man who knows what he wants, and as we've seen throughout his Rangers career and business career, he knows how to get through the various steps to get what he wants. I think he would be a really interesting guy to come back into the club. He would certainly run things his way, because that's how he operated previously. Now, he was also chair of a board, big decisions. Sometimes he needed board approval. He had to go to the other directors for those things. There was other issues. He said, well, I'm just going to sanction this. I'm going to sign this off. And also Stuart Robertson was then the man that was managing director at that time, which then kind of actioned a number of those things. So I think the chairman and the chief exec, they almost tie into the one talking point. Do you want a strong chairman like Dave to come in and then perhaps manage to a certain extent a chief exec, or do you want a chief exec who's going to be public face and be the man that runs Rangers, and the chairman is then more of a figurehead type role? I don't see Rangers getting both of those things. I don't think you'll get a chairman who is strong-willed and who sets those standards and drives everything his way, and the chief executive wants to do. I think that might be too many powerful voices. I think they probably end up with one scenario and it's the other one. And as it stands, I don't really see how Dave has the backing to get back into the boardroom. As much as I would like it, as much as I think he'd be good for Rangers, I'm not convinced that the other directors there and that the investor base at present would be for it. So I think he may be fighting a losing battle here, which is interesting because the fans, now that story went out over the weekend. He also spoke really well about John Bennett, and he wished John all the best, and he's also spoken to him quite a lot recently. No one knows the pressure of being Rangers chairman better than Dave King. He was the man that Mike Ashley tried to put in jail at Christmas, and that's a stress as well. So he spoke very well about John, but those two stories when they went out, then the fan reaction was interesting. There's some people very much all for it, some people very much all against it. There was this kind of grey middle ground of, well, I can see the positives and the negatives. How do you think that the fan base would react to someone like Dave coming back in?
It was interesting. I was going to ask you, because I consider myself just to be a fan of the club and like the people that attend every week, and that's where I am. And I'll put it to you from my perspective with Dave King, and everybody's grateful, 100% grateful of what Dave King did in 2015, along with Paul Murray, etc. I think everybody knows that, and that's doesn't need to be said every time, because we're all extremely grateful for Dave King. We remain extremely grateful for Dave King. My issue with Dave King is how he left, the manner in which he left, the issues that came from that, Chris, the ongoing issues with the parks, which dominate almost every time he mentions anything. There's a dig in at the parks, and I think stuff like that is grained on me, and it becomes unnecessary. When there's discussions about him coming back as chairman, and he speaks so emotively about the club being in crisis and about it being, basically a shell of what he had built, and he now has to come back and fix it. The obvious question from me is, why is he allowed that to happen? As a major shareholder, why has he walked away effectively washing his hands of it, allowed this to happen, been happy to blame Douglas or blame whoever else, and then come back in and almost try and ride to the rescue of saying, I'm here to fix all these things that have gone wrong since I've left. As a major shareholder, I understand stepping back. I'm not chairman anymore. but that's your investment. He's speaking in a way that investment's almost been run into the ground and Rangers are back to where they started from when he came in, etc. One, I don't think that helps anybody. Two, I think when you use stuff like crisis and you speak as brutally, bluntly as he did, it leads to questions from me of why is that being allowed to happen. Dave's as guilty for big decisions going wrong at Rangers Football Club as John Bennett, as Douglas Park, as anybody else in that boardroom has been. Nobody's perfect in it at all. It's a collective to why we're here. But this, and how it feels to me, is this leaving, washing your hands with it, and then all of a sudden back because everybody else has ran it into the ground. It feels a wee bit like it's disingenuous to me that Dave King should have been more active, he should have been more present, and he shouldn't have allowed it to get to the point where he's having to come back into this state as the major shareholder. And that's how, rightly or wrongly, and that's what I would say to Dave King personally himself, is why is that being allowed to happen? So that's the questions that I have from it, Chris, with regards to Dave King coming back in. I'm probably in the grey area bit that you spoke about. And it just seems like it's all a bit, well, yeah, you're happy to blame everybody else, but you played a major part in this as well. And that's not me being disrespectful to Dave King. It's not me saying that he doesn't deserve the platitudes of what he's done and the money he's put in and the investment and the time and taking on Mike Ashley and all that kind of stuff. It's not. It's just asking, from my point of view as a supporter, why just wipe your hands with it for years and years and years, allow all that things to happen, blame everybody else, and then come back like you're the one to sort it all, when really it's happened under your watch as much as a custodian of the club than anybody else.
I think the point you make there, Steve, is a fair one in terms of no Rangers chairman has been perfect. No Rangers chief exec has been perfect. No Rangers manager or player has been perfect. Mistakes have been made. You have to remember Dave was chairman when Pedro Caixinha was appointed as manager and allowed to remain manager for, even though it was a short term, somehow as long as he did. There was the appointment of Graham Murty and the Derek McKinnon situation. He will then rightly, I think, point to the Stephen Gerrard appointment. He clearly still feels, I think, quite hurt by how Stephen left the club in terms of, as he would say it, being forced out by Douglas Park. I think that's where a lot of his animosity towards Douglas comes from. Clearly, Douglas ran Rangers in a different way than Dave did, and that Dave wishes Rangers to be run. But he is a controversial figure at times. Like he says what he thinks. He says what he believes in, and I think he almost has a quality that when it comes to appointing the next Rangers chairman, if it's not going to be him, he has a quality that I think is quite important, and he doesn't really care what people think about him. He does things how he believes they should be done, and I think that comes into whether that's a player, whether it's a fan, whether it's a chief exec. You can't get too wound up in what the criticism is, because there's so much of it out there, and you have to have big shoulders, obviously, but I think you have to be able to brush things off as well. I think that ties into the you mentioned earlier on about John having his face on the banners. We all know the banner style. We've all seen the Twitter picture style with the red circle with a line through it, and John's had his face on it. Stuart Robertson, Ross Wilson had that treatment last year. Other key figures have had it, and no doubt they will have it once again. But it almost feels like when people say sack the board, they don't really mean sack the board, they mean sack the chairman, because I've not really seen strong opinions on, well, what does John Halstead do, or what does Julian Woltart do, what's George Taylor bringing to the party. No one really knows the level of their influence. No one really knows their Rangers story. I think people will be able to tell you that they are investors, won't be able to really tell you how much money they've put in or why they're putting their money in. So when people do say sack the board, it is really pointed at the chairman, which I think brings us on to, do Rangers need a new board? Do they need a new core of investors, or do they just need a chairman with a vision and a plan, and a chief exec with a vision and a plan, and you then allow the investor core and the rest of the board just to operate almost as they had been. Is the level of change required that drastic, or can a lot of Rangers problems really be solved with two really good appointments?
How do you say they need both? Because I think they do need key appointments, right? We've already covered that. Would it be nice to have some fresh investment and some fresh direction, some fresh ideas from the investor side of it? Yes. So I think that they can both coexist. The chairman and the CEO is vital, like immediate vital for stability, for leadership, for direction, right? That everything. And then you stop the cycle of this reoccurring. We need appointments, Chris, that are going to be there for 3 years. You know what I mean? And then they can successive plan and put in place, you know, so that we're not waiting 6 months for James Bisgrove's replacement.
Mhm.
The next James Bisgrove that comes in 3 years' time, when he's ready to go into bigger and better things, he should be in a position to know who's next and all that kind of stuff. So I think that there's a need for that. There's definitely a need for, you know, some fresh investment. I think that's, you know, a fresh leadership off the pitch and momentum, I think, impetus, whatever word you want to use. So I think they can definitely both coexist, Chris. Definitely. I think the CEO is the key one for me. It has to be correct. It has to be soon. It has to be the right one to do. I don't think that we can wait another 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, but it needs to be the key appointment. So it might have to be. So that puts a lot of pressure on John Gilligan. He needs to communicate. He needs to then speak, doesn't he? He needs to go to the support and things like that. So I think that's important as well, Chris. And I don't want to go over too many things with the CEO and the chairman because I've babbled on so much about it the last couple of months, but I do think they're completely vital, Chris. And I think as well that, you know, the question over, I think, Philip Clement, the boardroom giving him this new deal and things like that. He's met John Gilligan, obviously, on Monday. Do you think Clement now needs to repay that faith and he can play a part in how do I word this? He can play a part in making the transition easier by getting a football team on the pitch that wins games and goes on a run where things will become easier. You get 5 or 6 victories in a row, it becomes normality again. Things become a little bit less toxic, a little bit less pressurized. Do you think he has to repay that faith a wee bit? And does he have a role to play in this?
I think if you're looking at leadership figures right now, I think that we have this idea of the manager should be the most important figure at a football club now. The man is the manager. Sorry, is the main man there. Clement, I think, does have. He certainly has his doubters amongst the support. He's not had his face on one of those banners yet, but I think he has lost a bit of faith amongst sections of the fan base, and we've spoken an awful lot about that over the last few weeks. He has not lost any faith at boardroom level. As you said there, John met him on Monday. I believe George Latham met him on Monday up at the training ground as well. Not to reassure him that his job is safe, not to say you can go and do whatever you like because you've now got free reign. I think more just to kind of reset things almost now. Philippe obviously worked really closely with John Bennett over the summer. John clearly played a big role in terms of the manager coming into the club in the first place, so it's only natural that he will not feel put out, but it will feel different for him not having that John Bennett figure there. He does have people who care about the club ahead of him in the pecking order now, if you like. But ultimately, I think, as he mentioned post-match on Sunday, his job is to win games of football. And as you outlined there, if Rangers can go through this next 5-6 weeks and pick up a couple of European wins, progress in the cup, win some league games, even if that doesn't result in the gap to Celtic coming down, it would put people in a far happier place. It would take a bit of heat out of the situation. It would bring the noise level down a wee bit. We know only too well that if things don't go well in these next 6 weeks, everything then gets wrapped up. Everyone is back in the firing line. So I think that the part that the manager and the players can play here can't be understated. Yes, they will not appoint a chief exec. They will not be involved in the direction that the new chairman wishes to go in when he's sitting down and he's planning things with the board. But the part that they've got to play in terms of just keeping things ticking over, you used normality as a word on one of these shows the other week there. Normality for Rangers right now can only be winning football games, because at boardroom level, it's not normal to not have a chief exec, to not have a chairman, with all respect to John and interim role that he will do. But you don't have those positions filled long term, it does create instability. It does pose questions. Some of those questions can be answered by what the manager and the players do over these next wee while. I think that's hopefully, as you mentioned right at the top of the show, if things do go well, we might get to talk about football one day on one of these shows, rather than chief exec issues or boardroom issues or iBooks issues, that type of thing. But as always, there is plenty to keep us busy. I think that'll do us for this latest episode of The Talking Point. Thank you as always for joining myself and Stevie. You can find all the previous episodes of the show on our YouTube channel. And of course, if you like what we do here at the Rangers Review, then please like the channel, subscribe to the website, and continue to support the work that we do. Stevie will have his column on the site over the next couple of days. And of course, we have all the build-up, the action, and the reaction to Rangers being back at Ibrox against Dundee on Saturday. So once again, thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon.